Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and obviously distracted this first episode of the new year, 2024. Thank you, and welcome to the Virtual CISO Moment. I've got Thomas Ballin. Ballin.
Ballin.
Ballin. Thank you. I was so focused on the pronunciation of the name, I forgot to get us in the screen to begin with. So that's okay. We're going to keep on going straight through. He joins us today as our first guest of the new year. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. He is the director and co-founder of Cytix. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thomas, would love to hear about your path, how you got started in cyber, and your entire journey from the beginning to where it led you to today to being a co-founder and director of Cytix.
Yeah, sure. So I think probably going back to high school is a good place to start. I always had an affinity for IT and computers and things related to that, but I never really had much time for the lessons, and that resulted in me being politely asked to leave high school at the ripe age of 17. And I at the time. I was looking at options, college, things like that, and none of them seemed really that appealing to me. And my mum basically said, either go find yourself a job doing something that you want to, go back to school, or go get yourself a job at McDonald's. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that last one didn't seem particularly appealing to me, and neither did the college. So I started Googling around for IT, computer jobs related to that. Didn't even really know that the cyber industry was an industry. But I stumbled upon this job advertising ethical hacker as an opportunity, an apprenticeship. And I applied for it, not really expecting to get the job. But surprisingly, they decided that they liked my application. They had me in for an interview. I managed to get an offer then and there in that interview, and found myself as a sort of junior penetration tester.
Mm-hmm.
That was about sort of 10 years ago. And since then, I moved through a few different companies doing pen testing for a number of years, and ended up finding myself leading a team in a sort of mid-sized boutique consultancy. Which was fine for a few years. Is a lot of fun. You get to say you hack into banks, prisons, and airports for a living, and who doesn't go around bragging that? But after a while, it got a little bit sort of tired. You come back in, it's the age-old story in penetration testing. You come in every year and you find that the same vulnerabilities are showing up from customer to customer, and even worse, the same vulnerabilities are showing up in the same customer every single year. They're not fixing things. All you're doing is adding to a list that is probably not going to be read by anybody but some particularly diligent auditor every now and then. So myself and my colleague there said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something that we can do to try and address the need for identifying vulnerabilities and actually applying our skill set in a way that helps businesses. And that sort of led us to found Cytix, which I think we'll come on to in a bit.
So, what would you say is the one of the more significant threats to cybersecurity in small and mid-sized businesses? You touched on one that I thought was really interesting, and I never really thought about this from the pen tester's perspective of like going to the same clients year after year and discovering, in essence, the same vulnerabilities, which I imagine that must have been somewhat demoralizing at some point in time. But does that point to one of the larger issues that small, or maybe all businesses have?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that businesses have when it comes to vulnerabilities generally is just the fact that in order to stay ahead and on top of your game, and I don't mean insecurity, I mean just as a business generally now, you're expected to move at a sort of an incredible pace forward, and you're not really supposed to look back and say, okay, let's go and correct this, that, and the other. And so, a lot of businesses are having to build on sand, or having to really build on known vulnerabilities, and just ignore things that they know, this massive vulnerability debt that they're staring at, and they're just having to ignore it and accept it because of the rate that people are expecting these businesses to be able to progress at, either because they're VC funded startups that are trying to barrel forward to their next funding round, or because they're just massive enterprise organizations that are trying to keep up with some of these exciting technologies coming out of places like the United States.
So, how can you convince the businesses that they need to spend more resources or more attention on some of these issues, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's not necessarily about spending more resources or more attention. It's just about looking at things in a more intelligent and more pragmatic way. Being able to
Okay.
say you don't need to um, don't pull out the old playbook that worked 40 or 50 years ago in order to find the vulnerabilities, and don't assume that the same thing that worked when you were a 30-person organization is going to work when you're a 3,000 or 30,000 person organization. It's looking at things and saying, okay, what are the actual root causes of these vulnerabilities? What are the actual things that are introducing the risks into the business, and then
Mhm.
trying to come up with more strategic approaches to being able to actually address those.
So a lot of what your experience was led you to co-found Cytix. Can you talk a little bit about what Cytix does and how it can help businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So effectively, what Cytix is born out of is the idea that the vulnerabilities and security issues don't just appear by magic, right? In the defensive space, we've had this concept for a long time. Events happen, and that event instigates a defensive team to start looking into what's going on, whether there's an intruder in a network, whether there's a system that's been compromised. But effectively, there is some piece of intelligence that's been identified either inside their environment or through threat intelligence being fed into them that has instigated them to sort of ramp up and start using all of these incredible tools that they've got at their disposal. And we're saying that finding vulnerability should be exactly the same. There's intelligence that can be gathered from project management tools or from code repositories or even from threat intelligence and estate discovery and things like that. And each time we identify something that's changed inside an environment or external to an environment, using that to initiate specific targeted security testing that says, okay, this is exactly what's changed. We know these kinds of vulnerabilities may have been introduced, and therefore we're going to run these tools or create these manual testing action for penetration testers or some sort of a combination of the two of those.
So it almost sounds like that you're looking at basically like some method of vulnerability assessment, but instead of being a click a button and it goes out and just does its thing like it does for everything else, you're actually ingesting some other information to make intelligent decisions about what to look for.
Yeah, exactly. So trying to plug into everything in the technical estate that an organization has and really try and use that as telemetry to guide and inform the security testing program. Our motto is test intelligently, and it really is that. Just gather as much intelligence as you possibly can and use that to build a sort of robust continuous testing model.
Okay, well, you got my cogs turning in my mind here, and I'm gonna lay out an example, see if I understand this, and maybe this is outside of what it does, or maybe it isn't. But let's just say, for example, in my business, I've got a ticketing system, and in that ticketing system, because we practice good change management, I put in there we are installing server X. It is a Windows server, and it's going to perform. Let's just say it's a DNS server. Make it like really simple, okay? And the ticket then says, okay, we have now assigned this to this team. We have assigned it this IP address. It went live on this date, and we have tested it and we've closed it, and everything's all done and hunky dory. But the network team did not update their security, rather their network maps, because they had to put in a new subnet. Let's just say. And the security team, which is tasked usually of just running scans based on networks they know, they totally miss it. And so this thing is never scanned. Are you saying that Cytix perhaps can go into your ticketing system and extract that data and say, hey, wait a minute, we know that there's a new server out there and it's performing DNS, so we need to do some queries against that and see what's going on there?
Exactly, yeah. So effectively plug into Jira or ServiceNow or whatever it is you're using as a ticketing system. And then we're actually using sort of open source LLMs behind the scene, without diving too much into the technical, but to be able to categorize that and say, okay, we know that that is a deployment of a new server, and we know that it is using DNS, and we know the IP address is this. And we, based on sort of analysis of the various different tools, we don't build any testing tools, but our analysis of the various different tools tell us that if we run this tool and this tool,
Right.
then we'll be able to identify the kinds of vulnerabilities that something that meets the criteria of being a server and running DNS might have. And therefore, we're able to just orchestrate that testing, and that security team can effectively just watch it happening and be as hands-off as they want to be.
And you mentioned LLM, so I'm assuming that this is a generative AI process that's going on in the background. And you also mentioned, and I got this part wrong, your product doesn't actually do the test, but rather it informs what tests should be done.
Yeah, exactly. So we integrate with a number of different both commercial off the shelf and open source tools in order to run the testing. So there's brilliant people out there creating incredibly capable technologies in order to run the scans and the tests, and there's also people as well, because tools can only get you 80% of the way. All we're doing is we are helping to set the configurations and run those third-party tools and scanners, and then create those manual testing actions in the times where we know that the tools aren't going to quite be able to cut it for particular changes.
See, I love that because a lot of times, one of the truism in security is you can't protect what you don't know about, and in this rather simple condition, the security team may not have known about that server unless something happens. So it functions as sort of a discovery, but then also takes that intelligence and tells you, okay, it's very simple to say there's a new box out here, but these are the things that you need to look at based on what we know how it was deployed. This is a problem that I guess I didn't even realize existed, or rather I realized existed, but I didn't think that it could ever be solved. But it sounds like that you all are actually going down that path to make our lives a lot easier.
It's certainly the intention that we've got, and one of the other things as well is just being able to abstract some of the responsibility from security teams when it comes to things like change management or estate discovery, and instead just to have a defined policy that says, no, in fact, if these things happen, if this particular configuration or these particular actions are taken by an application team or an infrastructure team or a cloud team or whoever else, then security testing will happen, because that is just a built-in part of the process, and it's not something where you're having to hound an application team and damaging that relationship and falling out with them because they're not running SaaS or because they're ignoring low or informational risk findings or any of that kind of stuff. As much as we can abstract the responsibility for the mundane away from the CISOs and the security leaders as possible, that I think the better the relationship that we can help them achieve with the teams that are building and engineering.
Sure, and let the CISOs and their team focus on the actual risk management instead of some of this minutia and all that, because they're now going to have all this additional awareness. Well, I love that. I definitely am looking forward to learning more about the product. I also want to learn a little bit more, talking about awareness. That's what made me think about it, is the Real Cyber Talk podcast. And it was actually, I believe, your partner, Ben, who had posted something on LinkedIn a few weeks back about the podcast coming up that really intrigued me, and thought about getting you guys on here and talking about it. So tell us about the podcast, why you're doing it and what it's all about.
Yeah, sure. So I think the podcast was really born out of myself and Ben. We have conversations on a daily basis where people introduce us to new ideas and new concepts. At the moment, I'm sat in a sort of custom built cybersecurity accelerator sort of shared office space. So there's dozens of cybersecurity specific companies that come in here all the time, and we have conversations with them, and somebody says the latest acronym, or somebody says the latest concept that people have come up with, and we end up having these 45-minute long, hour-long discussions about things that aren't necessarily related to us specifically, aren't necessarily related to their business specifically, but they're just interesting things. And after a while, we sort of realized, we're spending all of this time in the day talking about these ideas, and it might actually be interesting for us to put some of them on record and try and actually be able to reflect on them and consider them more deeply. And then we said, actually, do you know what? maybe other people might be interested in this as well. Maybe they won't be, and it's just us rambling amongst ourselves, but at least we'll have something that we can look back on. So we started recording it, invited in a few people who we've, had some lengthy conversations in the past with about a lot of these ideas. And it seems to be going well so far. We're launching officially, I think the 2nd of January, but we've got a few that we built up in the pipeline. It's really just invite some people in who might know a few things that we've not heard about before, and start talking to them about it and grilling them and really, discovering the unknown.
No, I think that's great that you actually took something that you guys were doing anyway and came up with the epiphany in a way that other folks might actually want to hear about it. And so much about learning in cyber, I think, is more effective when it's actually presented in a discussion format as opposed to a unidirectional, this is what you should do, sort of like a traditional teaching and all that. So you said it drops on the 2nd of January, which is also the date that this podcast drops. So yours may probably be out by the time this one drops. So I'll make sure that we have links in the show notes, but where can they find it? What platforms, the YouTube channel, that sort of thing?
Yes, so it should be on most of the major sort of podcasting things: Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. LinkedIn is the place that we usually use to actually sort of advertise most of these things, and then we kind of just let all of the other channels come from there. I think LinkedIn's proven to be a pretty effective way to be able to reach out to people in the community. I mean, I've not found anywhere else yet that maybe Twitter, but that's going a little bit sort of stray at times at the moment. But yes, it seems that LinkedIn's sort of proven to be the place where the cybersecurity community likes to find out about these things. So that's where we're trying to spread the message at the moment.
And that's another excellent point, because it made me think of a post that I had out last week about people who generally just use LinkedIn to jump in, look for a job, then as soon as they find a job, they jump out. And they're missing all of the opportunities, not only to help other people who are looking for jobs, but as you said, to learn through all of this. I really see LinkedIn as being a wonderful platform for that sharing. It is growing in that sense, in my opinion. I think that, yes, there are some more niche type areas like Discord and those sorts of areas, but and of course Twitter, InfoSec Twitter is it's kind of gone left and right and up and down and all that, who knows, but LinkedIn seems to be a very consistent place for that sort of conversation. So very good. Looking forward definitely to seeing that. I was excited about maybe even offering to drop by and talk to y'all myself, because you said you were in Manchester, but I thought it was Manchester, Tennessee. So, but you're in Manchester, England, if I think I have that right.
You do indeed, yeah. You're always welcome to drop by, but it might take a little bit longer to cross the pond.
Yeah, the next time that I'm like kind of hanging out on, on a flight, I'll just like jump out the door and land there or something. I don't know. Well, I know, there's a lot of stress involved, and as folks who have been watching and listening to me for some time now know, one of my passions is trying to bring awareness to the stresses involved in cyber. It's a highly competitive field, and we feel that we're always on fire. We're not only competitive to try to get and maintain positions or to move up the ladder, but also just simply to do our job and do it effectively. And certs and awareness and all of that just seems to be overwhelming at times. And I think it's so important that people step away. Otherwise, they'll face what I think is a mental health crisis in some way in the field. And so I always encourage people to step away, do something that's not cyber related, or if there's something cyber that you enjoy that is not stressful, that's fine too. The main point is to step away. What's an example of something you do to get away from the stresses, not only of cyber, but also of being an entrepreneur, being co-founder of Cytix?
I think there's two sides to that. So in terms of an actual activity, cooking is my go-to. It's you can
Mine's
make it,
eating. So
I love food. It's the fact that it can be as short or as long as you want it to be. If you want to just do a quick 5-minute thing, you absolutely can. But also, if you want to spend 4 or 5 hours preparing something, then that's a possibility too. You've got a complete scope to be able to experiment and do something that is engaging, but engaging in a completely different way. You're not problem solving in the same way. It's creative rather than maybe more sort of critical in terms of the approach. So that's always my go-to. Plus, I think it's a good way just generally to be sort of healthy and you know, in terms of your well-being, being able to make sure that you're eating right and you're not just sort of grabbing a quick bite in between things is pretty fundamental. But the other thing as well, less an activity and more just a sort of outlook on it. You know, so I've been doing this for over 10 years now, and in that time I've sort of come to realize that as a industry, cybersecurity is very much a roller coaster. There are ups and there are downs, and there are, you know, there are absolutely times where I've loathed the industry and the some of the experiences and wondered why I didn't take that job at McDonald's when my mum suggested it back when I was 17. But being able to sort of remind yourself that that is the ups and the downs, and with the ebbs and the flows and the new sort of technologies that are evolving every day, if there is something that is painful for you today and something that makes your job negative, then you can bet somebody is working pretty hard on it and will have solved that problem probably in the next few months, if not the next couple of years. And if they're not, then that's a great opportunity for the next startup venture and something else to be excited about. So trying to just remind myself and sort of keep that sort of an outlook of just enjoying the ride, no matter whether it's a sort of an up or a down at the time, is basically a sort of a daily way to help myself just keep on track.
I think that that is spot on. I've been doing this for now 34 years, and it when I look back, it's I wish I had enjoyed the ride more instead of being more focused on being worried about what's coming up or more focused on mistakes that I made in the past. It really is, you know, it almost sounds cliche, but the joy is in the journey. And you're right, there are ups and downs, just like a roller coaster. But yeah, I think nothing against McDonald's. I think it's a more fulfilling path, quite honestly. So, what are your future plans? Whether it be for Cytix or for yourself or both?
Yeah, sure. So I think that myself and Cytix are so closely intertwined. And I always try and talk a little bit about something that's not Cytix related, so I don't seem like too much of a one-trick pony. But at this point, it is hard to distinguish where the business stops and where the man begins. But yeah, so we're on a massive sort of growth path at the moment. There's only 6 of us in the business right now, but we're about to close a funding round and probably double, triple in size before the end of the year in terms of sort of headcount and in terms of capabilities and customers and all of that other good stuff that comes along with that. In terms of where I want to be personally, I'd love to just see myself in a position where I can take maybe a little bit less of that sort of founder hands-on in every single aspect of it, and instead be doing more engaging things like, you know, this conversation, things that are giving back to the community and security related, but maybe not necessarily having to actually do all the technical typing, hacking, things like that. You know, just experiment a little bit with what else is out there in the industry and discover maybe some areas that I've not even thought about, bring some new things to the podcast, things like that. You know, just explore and start to really enjoy what other people are up to.
Well, and you just mentioned it. The podcast is definitely going to be one of them. I know, you know, I've been doing this now for quite some time, and it is fulfilling and stressful and relaxing. It gets a little bit stressful when you're trying a new format and you forget to put people's faces up on the screen, like in the beginning here, but that's okay. I think that I've lived long enough too that it's as part of the journey. It's like laugh at the mistakes and move on. It's all good. But well, this is fascinating. I'm so glad that we had this conversation. Definitely looking forward to digging more into Cytix and looking forward to the first episode of the Real Cyber Talk podcast, which most likely has already dropped by the time you all see or listen to this. So we'll get that link in the show notes. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And everybody, stay secure.